Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I am Beth Heiserman, Vice President of the Zonta Club of the Santa Clarita Valley and the Advocacy Chair. Joining us also is my co-chair, Alicia Estrada. Also in attendance, we have our Lieutenant Governor, Madam Debbie Angewit, and Area 3 Director, Madam Gloria Salas, and our President, Nicole Miller. If you have missed any of our past Empower Hours, please visit our website at scvzonta.org, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. This roundtable discussion is hosted by the Zonta Club of Santa Clarita Valley's Advocacy Committee. The Zonta Empowers Take Action series that will be offered several times a year and has highlighted subjects like human trafficking and PTSD. We will continue to have our future discussions that feature topics like intimate stalking and domestic violence and many others that will help our community understand topics that can be difficult to discuss. We are pleased to collaborate with many organizations locally that share our mission. Today's Empower Hour is being presented by Sara Tasneem, a child bride at age 15. Now a survivor, she advocates against child enforced marriage and violence against women and girls. Sara was born and raised in Southern California. She was also featured in Knots, a Forced Marriage Story. A child marriage is a marriage in which at least one party is under 18 years of age. As of January 2022, in 9 states, there is no legal minimum age where all exemptions were considered. California is included in those 9 states. As of July 2021, 6 states and 2 territories have banned underage marriages with no exception. Between 2000 and 2018, nearly 3,000 minors were legally married in the United States. Again, thank you for joining us today. And now I present Sara Tasneem.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. And thank you so much for sharing your Saturday with me today. Or at least an hour of it. So my name is Sara Tasneem, and I was forced to get married at the age of 15. And today I'm just going to talk a little bit about my experience and also ways that you all can get involved and how you can help advocate against this harmful practice that we call child marriage. So just a little bit about the agendas today. This is going to be an interactive discussion, so I highly encourage you all to turn on your cameras if you can, and I'm going to open it up a little bit. We're going to do some intros around the room. I'm going to talk a little bit about my advocacy work and my personal story. I'm going to review some of the definitions, and apologies for those of you who already know about child marriage, but this is just some review to make sure that everybody has some understanding about what child marriage means in the US, why advocacy is needed. We'll talk a little bit about some of the conclusions and recommendations that I have for folks, and then we're gonna open it up for questions, but also some action items. So I'm hoping that by today, you all know how to get involved and also where to go, and maybe even start writing some letters today. So we'll get started. So I just wanted to open it up, and whoever wants to volunteer can raise their hand, or you can put things into the chat, or you can feel free to take yourself off the mic when your name is called on and share. So one of the things that I was hoping that we could do is introduce yourself and what your interest is about this topic. And also, if you could share something about yourself when you were the age of 15, maybe some examples of that are like, what were your hopes and goals? What did you think your life was going to be like at 15? So I will start. My name is Sara Tasneem, and my interest is obviously personal. I'm personally passionate about this topic, and I try to share it with as many people as I can so that we can create awareness and change. And for me, when I was 15 years old, I wanted to be an Air Force pilot, and that was my hope and dream. So with that, I would love for somebody to raise their hand and volunteer. And we don't have to do everybody, but whoever wants to volunteer. And I'm looking around the room for people.
I'll go. I'm Beth Heiserman, as I said earlier. When I was 15, what I remember and what I expected my life to be is I bowled a lot. I was very active in bowling, my friends, going to the mall, going to the movies, hanging out in Westwood. That was like a big thing back then. And I think for my future was to, just be me. And that was my whole thing, going on to college and getting a career of something that I wanted to do. Marriage was never really a focus when I was younger.
Thank you, Beth. I see that Colleen has her hand up. Oh,
Unmute.
sorry, Colleen, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So I'm Colleen Reese-Reading. I'm a member of the Santa Clarita Zonta Club also. I'm secretary. So when I was 15, I also wanted to be an Air Force pilot. I applied to the Air Force Academy and really wanted to go there. I didn't get in. I ended up going to University of Michigan, but I also wanted to be an astronaut. Was in my dreams as well. So I became an aerospace engineer. Now I work for
Amazing.
NASA, but I'm not an astronaut or a pilot.
That's so awesome. That's so awesome to hear that you were able to achieve some of your goals. That's amazing.
It was. So I'm very lucky.
All right. I think I see Melee. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Right. Hi, I'm Melly Spencer. I am with the Zonta Club of Hilo, past governor. And at 15, I wanted to be a teacher. I will share something I never shared before, but I got married at 16. And actually, I'm still married. This year, we make 60 years married. So in my case, it worked out really well. But when we got married, our parents had to consent to the marriage. And we were independent from the time I was 16 until now.
Thank you, Melee. I appreciate you sharing your story. Gloria, I think you are next.
Okay, I'm outside, so pardon the helicopter noise. But when I was 15, I was in high school, and at that time, the women's movement was just taking off. And at that time, I wanted to be like Gloria Steinem. I wanted to be forceful and be advocating for women's issues. At that time, it was high school girls' issues. But and so here I find myself in Zonta, advocating for women and girls, and my cup says, I am a goddess, a glorious female warrior queen of all that I survey, enemies of fairness and equality, hear my womanly roar. So in a way, I am doing what I was thinking of doing when I was 15.
That's amazing. Thank you all so much for sharing. So I don't see any more hands up, but if you do want to share, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you. And one of the things and why I asked this is because, who we were at 15 really kind of shapes who we are later on in life. And so kind of with that in mind, I'm going to begin, talking about my story. So I advocate publicly to end the practice of forced child marriage in the United States. And I also work as a volunteer mentor with young women and older women who need support during or after experiencing a forced child marriage. And I'll get a little bit more into my story a little bit later, but my mission is really to create a network for survivors and other advocates and nonprofit organizations who can connect victims with services and also to raise public awareness about forced child marriage in the United States, really to develop partnerships for survivors, advocates, and nonprofit groups, especially groups like yours. It's amazing to see so many women coming together. And so that's really kind of what my mission is to just help create some of these networks and also to create change through planning, legislation, action, and support. And a little bit more about my work. So I do volunteer as a mentor. Right now, we recently started a support group for forced child marriage survivors who experienced also spiritual abuse within the cult that I was raised in. And that's a new project that I've been working on, and it's been successful. We've had 3 successful meetings, and they're going to be weekly and ongoing. And I also testify publicly in front of legislative bodies. I share my story. I've shared my story across the United States and even globally through telling my story through media. I've been featured in documentary, and I'll share some of those links with you. But aside from my advocacy work, I also have just a normal, regular day-to-day life. I work for the county government. I work in finance. I have a master's degree in public administration, which took me a really long time to get. I actually just graduated in 2019. I'm also on a few different committees and coalitions throughout the United States that work to end child marriage. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about my story. My father introduced me to my husband to be the morning that I was actually told that I would marry him. So I was 15 years old, and my parents had been divorced since I was 5. And they had a very contentious divorce. I grew up mainly with my father, and my father actually joined an Islamic cult. And I was raised in that cult with very strict ideas of what gender roles should be. So we were not encouraged as girls to pursue our education. We were really taught that our roles in life were basically to be subservient to men. And we were also exposed to numerous forms of violence and abuse from a very young age living with my dad. So in my dad's household, I did not have any autonomy or really a sense of self or identity. I never felt that I could challenge him or even really talk to him. So I kind of grew up with this idea that you can't challenge authority. You kind of, go along with it. And I shifted around from household to household. I actually moved in with my mom when I was 12 years old. I was reunited with her. And my mom kind of really instilled in me this idea that education is extremely important to your future. And while I was living with her, I decided that I wanted to go to the Air Force. I joined the JROTC at my high school, and that was kind of my thought. I wanted to go to law school, and I was like, how am I going to go to law school? So I thought, let me join the Air Force, and that's how I'll pay for my law school. Well, my mom had shared with my dad that I had been seeing a young man my age. And he asked me to go visit that summer. He was living in California. And as soon as I got off the plane, my dad sat me down and told me that I was going to get married because sex outside of the religion is not allowed. And, that was going to damn me to hell. It was going to damn him to hell. And it just seemed like everybody was going to go to hell because of me. And so, I thought, okay, well, I don't really know what that means. Maybe I was going to get engaged or something. I had no idea. And we were at a religious conference in Los Angeles. And it was there that I was introduced to a man who was 28 years old. I was 15. And I was told that he had been picked to be my husband, and that I was going to marry him. And, my dad told me to go over and talk to him. And I talked to him for about 5 minutes. he was a man. I didn't really have anything in common with him. I mean, he was just like, he basically just said, well, I don't want to wait. And I didn't really know what to do. I was 15 years old, still living with my mom and my dad. They had control over my life. So I had no idea. I just went along. I mean, I don't know. And looking back, I could have said something, but being so young and just not having understanding of what was happening, I think I was just doing what any 15-year-old would, I guess. And that night I was married to a man in a religious ceremony. And I was physically handed over to him. And from that point on, my life really completely changed. And I was taken out of the country about a week later, came back to the United States. I was pregnant at that time, and I was 7 months pregnant. And my ex-abuser basically told me that we were going to drive up. We were going to take a drive, and we drove to Reno. We were living in the Bay Area at the time, and that's where we were legally married. I don't remember ever being asked if that's something that I wanted to do. I was not able to really have any contact with my mom before then, because my ex basically controlled my entire life. I was 16 at the time, and I had no real concept of the danger and the abuse that I was being exposed to on a daily basis. And so I didn't realize that I was being abused. And so, for me, I was trapped. I was a minor, and for all purposes, my ex-husband was actually my guardian. And so I gave birth to my daughter. And after having my daughter, I think something in me just really changed. I felt a strong need to get away from the situation. And that's when I began really fighting for my freedom. And I started going back to school. It took me 7 years to leave my ex-husband. And I was 23 years old at the time. And so this is why I think that my story is important, because while there are, situations like Melee shared with us where child marriage is consensual, there are many more children who are actually forced into their marriages. And so that is really why I advocate for changing the legislation, because my case, unfortunately, is not a single or solitary case. This happens to many, many, many children.
Excuse me.
And
Sarah,
so, yes.
you had a question. Did your mother have to consent to the marriage along with your father?
That's a great question. And actually at the time, no, she didn't. She didn't even have to be aware of it. I was forced to marry in Reno, Nevada, where at the time the laws allowed for a permission slip from my father consenting on my behalf. And that's all it took. I actually advocated for legislation in Nevada, and the laws were changed. However, they still allow for minors to get married. The bar is a little bit higher now, but unfortunately, they are still allowing for child marriage to happen. You have to be 17 years old, and I think you have to have your high school diploma now. But to me, that bar is still too low. And I will say that Nevada's laws currently are better than California's. So that should kind of tell you where we're at right now with our laws. So what is forced child marriage? And by the way, I encourage anybody who wants to ask questions, please put them in the chat, raise your hand. I really want this to be interactive. So feel free to ask any questions. So what is forced child marriage? Forced child marriage happens when someone uses threats and abuse to force a minor into marriage. And that can be coercion, that can, just simply being given somebody only one option. You have to get married and that's your only option. The abuse of forced marriage, not forced child marriage, is defined by the U.S. Department of State when someone is married without the consent of one or both people in the marriage. And so, going back to this definition, when you're a child, in many states, you can't give consent to have sex until you're over 18, for example. Here in California, you can't go buy a pack of cigarettes. And why is that? It's because children don't have the same capability of giving consent as an adult does. And we actually don't share rights as an adult until we're 18 years old. So that can create some significant barriers that I will get into here. So again, forced marriage is when one or more parties don't consent to the marriage. Child marriage, it just means that one of the parties is a minor, so they're 18 and under. People who serve victims of forced child marriage could be a domestic violence service provider, law enforcement agency. They often seek out legal services. And Unchained at Last found that nearly 300,000 children, as a few as young as 10 years old, were legally married here in the United States between 2000 and 2018. And some 60,000 marriages occurred with an age difference that should have been considered a sex crime. Child marriage happens overwhelmingly to girls. Studies show that 86% of minor marriages were girls marrying adult men. So that is what child marriage looks like in the United States today. It is girls marrying adult men. Child marriage has devastating impacts on girls worldwide. It impacts their health, their education, it impacts their opportunities, and it exposes them to numerous forms of violence. And towards the end of this presentation, I will navigate over to Unchained at Last so that you can also do your own research and see the impacts of child marriage. So what are the laws here in California? In the state of California, minors at any age can get married. And they can get married with parental consent and judicial review. And so judicial review can vary from county to county. It really depends on what that county requires as far as their judicial review. It can be as simple as a form, or it can be an interview by somebody appointed to interview the child. But I will say that judicial review adds another layer of abuse onto a child who is potentially being forced into a marriage. As a child, I remember being coached as a 15-year-old before I went to the doctor, before I went in a public place where I may have to talk to an adult in charge. I was coached. I was told what to tell these people. And so I think when we're talking about judicial review with children who have been exposed to violence, that's just not a high enough bar. And consent given by a minor to marry an adult is questionable at best and a human rights abuse at worst. So what has happened in the last 5 years? A lot has happened in the fight to end child marriage. 6 states have actually legally ended the practice of child marriage, meaning 18, no exceptions. And Delaware and New Jersey in 2018 became the first 2 states to end this human rights abuse, followed by American Samoa in 2018, the US Virgin Islands, and then Pennsylvania and Minnesota in 2020, and finally Rhode Island and New York in 2021, which is amazing. And so we need more legislative action in 44 states. So that is where you all come in, and I'm hoping that you all can help lend your voices to this action that we really need. So there's a California petition, and I can, maybe we can paste this in the chat, but if you could sign this, that would be great. We already have about, I think, 20,000 signatures on it. So we're hoping to get up to 50,000, and maybe somebody will start paying attention to it. And here are just some reasons why I think advocacy is important. I think sharing stories of survival helps to raise awareness. And I hope that telling my story to you all will connect you with the impact of child marriage and help empower you to raise awareness about this issue, because everybody's voice matters. And advocacy is important because marriage under the age of 18 is actually legally allowed in 44 states. So that's a huge number of states. And because it usually happens to kids who are already suffering from other forms of abuse. So in my case, I was already suffering from numerous forms of abuse under my dad's household. But that is actually a common theme. And I work with a lot of advocates, and many of the girls who survive forced child marriage often share with me that they were exposed to other forms of abuse prior to their marriage. So they're often, young women who are considered throwaway children. Their parents don't want them. They don't want their responsibility, or, there may be some abuse happening in their lives that adults are trying to cover up. But there's just so many reasons why child marriage occurs, and why forced child marriage occurs in the United States today. And generally it relates back to abuse in some form or another. And why does forced child marriage happen? Because parents are the ones who are forcing it. They're not preventing it. They're not protecting their children. They're actually the ones forcing the kids into the marriage. And also because child marriage is just another form of human trafficking. And it almost always leads to other forms of abuse. And so here's just a little bit of some of the literature that's out there. And I'll share this with you all, and you guys can read through it and check out these links and, figure out where you stand on this issue. But I just wanted to also share with you some of the findings that I actually found here in the Bay Area doing my thesis. I was curious to know if victims of forced child marriage were being served here in the Bay Area, or if they could be served here in the Bay Area. And I interviewed quite a few shelters, and 6 out of 8 of those shelters and 3 out of 4 police agencies that I interviewed reported cases of forced child marriage and forced marriage. 7 out of 8 of those shelters referred minors out to youth shelters where there was a reported lack of beds. And just so you know, youth shelters are really dedicated to youth. And so they may not serve the same population of folks that are experiencing child marriage, because oftentimes if you're a child marriage victim, you have minors in your care. And so you have a different set of needs than a lot of the youth that go into youth shelters. And 2 out of 8 of the shelters identified victims of forced child marriage. One of those shelters actually reported as many as 80 victims annually that they saw. And actually all victims needed to come in under the umbrella of domestic violence, sexual assault, or some other form of abuse to be able to access the services. And most importantly, they had to be 18 and over. So all of the shelters that I talked to actually only served 18 and over, except for the folks that referred out to youth shelters. And youth shelters served a very different population of folks that would actually need these services. So the most critical identified categories of the experts that I spoke to were emergency shelters, law enforcement intervention, legal help, and mental health services. The 2 most important categories of services, emergency shelter and law enforcement intervention, were the most critical services that were needed for victims, but they were the most underserved as well. And so that is really, I mean, that is really kind of what I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for those victims who really need these services, who aren't being served, and whose stories just aren't being told at all. People really don't understand what services are needed for forced child marriage victims. They don't even really understand what type of abuse it is. And so really, it's about educating the public and about creating awareness that forced child marriage exists and it's happening, and also how we can start to shift the focus of being more survivor centric and being able to serve these victims, and also just creating less stigma around it. So there's some links here to the documentary that I was in, and also to my site. And let's see, I just wanted to actually navigate you guys to a few places. But before I do that, I just kind of want to open it up to the chat and see if there's any questions. And if anybody.
We do have a question.
Okay.
How do cultural norms factor into child marriage? Can it be considered child abuse if it is culturally motivated and considered normal?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, it is child abuse. Forcing somebody to do something that they don't want to do is abuse. It doesn't matter what culture you're in. It's abuse is abuse, no matter what name you give to it. And as far as cultural norms, so I think cultural norms really come into play here, because it's how does your culture value children? Do children have a voice in who they are and what they want to do and their identity? And if that has been damaged in some way, then they have they don't have a specific identity, or they don't feel valued, their futures aren't valued, then yes, the culture has a very significant impact, kind of like mine did. But also the idea that somehow, a girl doesn't add value or doesn't bring value to the family, I think is another kind of cultural norm that I've seen in forced child marriages. And then just generally, trying to hide abuse, or, I've spoken to victims where there was abuse happening, and a way to get around the abuse was to marry their rapist to cover up pregnancies. And so there can just be so many different reasons why a child marriage would occur. And to me, the real cultural issue is undervaluing a girl. And I think that's really significant. And Gloria, I see your hand up. And you're on mute.
Thank you. A few years ago, just before the pandemic, there was a California representative, I believe he was in Northern California, who actually introduced a piece of legislation that would make marriage 18, no exceptions. And even I think there was seroptimist groups and Zonta groups that issued letters of support, and even Tahiri. But then something happened, and it ended up being signed by the governor, I think it was Governor Brown, in a watered down form.
Yes.
So who are we fighting against, and how do we start pressuring our legislatures to say, hey, this is an issue and you need to look at it if you want our votes when come time to re-election?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that important question, Gloria. And you're actually coming to the next part of our presentation. So I'll explain a little bit about the background of the legislation that happened in 2017 that I actually initially was a part of, but then opposed the bill in its watered down state. There was a bill that was introduced by Senator Jerry Hill back in 2017 when one of his constituents actually came forward and reported, she was a high schooler, and she reported that one of her friends was being forced into a marriage and that it was legal. And sure enough, he looked into it and it was legal. And so he started, he proposed this bill that would end child marriage before the age of 18. And it was opposed by the ACLU and by Planned Parenthood. And so I would actually love to share with you all the ACLU opposition memo that they put out in 2017. And this was their opposition against Senator Hill's bill. And basically, I mean, I'm happy to send this out to everybody actually, because I think it's really important to understand the issue and to understand why we were getting pushback on this. And so they're basically saying that there's not enough evidence regarding the nature, location, or severity of this problem in California. And, the reason there wasn't any evidence back then, and there still isn't enough today, is because California was not counting their minor marriages. And so the bill in 2017 in its watered down state basically ended up being instead of let's end this child marriage abuse, instead it became let's count the child marriage abuse. And so they signed into law that counties would start reporting their minor marriages. However, I've tried to contact counties. I know that Global Hope 365 has tried, and numerous other folks. Counties are still not counting their child marriages. And so we still don't know how widespread this issue is in California. However, just from the small amount of research that I was able to do in the Bay Area, I know that it's happening. And so I think, this entire letter is kind of based on really not understanding the issue at all, and really not even attempting to find out what the actual numbers are. And so that's pretty problematic when we're basically opposing legislation. And the ACLU, as many of you know, it would be extremely hard to introduce legislation if they were opposing it. And so what myself and the folks that I'm working with, Unchained at Last, folks from Zonta, Ela, I don't know if she's on right now, but we're basically trying to do a letter campaign to ACLU and demand that they not oppose legislation should we propose it in 2022 or 2023. And so kind of I'm asking for all of your help to really kind of look at this issue. And if anybody has any legal expertise to help us draft a letter to ACLU where we can really kind of look at their arguments and respond to them in a way that hopefully they can understand that this is an abuse that's happening here in California, and that it also takes children's rights away from them. When I was forced to marry, I was pulled out of school. I had to fight for my education, and that is the norm. Many child marriage victims are forced to drop out of school and raise children and become wives. So it limits their educations and their opportunities. It increases their risk of becoming, low income and not being able to support their family, which happened to me. I would love to share this with everybody and hopefully, start a letter campaign. Here's another area where this is Unchained at Last's website, and they actually have a whole area where you can get involved. There's a postcard that you can send to your legislators, so you can pick which area of the United States that you're in. So if you're in California, for example, let's just pick California, and you can put your name and your address and all that, and you can submit on behalf of your organization, and you can create a postcard party, which I think it's a really good way to raise awareness to your legislators. And then also on their website, you can go into child marriage and you can get all the facts here. It's a really great website. It's interactive. You can sign up for their newsletters. And so I just wanted to share that with you all. And then I just kind of want to open it up for some more conversation about this and kind of what your thoughts are. And I'm going to stop sharing for a sec so that we can all look at each other.
We do have a few questions
Sure.
in the chat. We also have interest in receiving the letter from the ACLU, which if you can just make sure that Beth or I have it, we'll make sure that everyone can receive it.
Sure.
But the first question is, have you seen any criminal charges in instances where the child marriage laws have been violated?
So the most recent child marriage laws were in 2018 to 2021. So actually, no. And I'm not sure that in the states that ended child marriage, if there was also a matching criminal statute. So in answer to your question, I really don't know. I think that would be a really good research topic. In California, there is a law that outlaws forced marriage. However, it's an extremely poorly written law, and there are no prosecutions that have been brought under it. Because I think the human trafficking laws are better for that particular situation. So that's definitely something I think that we could look into. Yeah.
Also, are there more girls that are in child marriage that are starting to ask for help?
So I work with Unchained at Last, and they kind of refer folks to me. And I think the last time I spoke to them, they said that, they've seen that the pandemic has actually increased the number of child marriages that are happening because it's actually made it easier for people to marry. So like before, you had to go to the courthouse, maybe show your birth certificate, fill out paperwork and that kind of stuff. A lot of those things have gone online. So it's actually made it easier to marry. And so that's definitely increased. So, until we really get like data from 2021, I'm not sure if we can tell how much it's increased, but I know that worldwide, a lot of organizations are reporting a huge increase in child marriage.
We also have a question to dive a little bit deeper into the ACLU, but why do you think that the ACLU opposes a ban on child marriage under the age of 18, whether there is convincing data that it is a problem or not?
Well, according to their letter, they basically called it a right of a child to get married, which is actually not true because a right to marry is, that would mean that you wouldn't have to get parental consent. So just like most people should have the right to an education, children actually don't have a right to get married. They need parental consent. So that actually makes it a non-right. So some of their arguments are actually false. And so that's kind of where I would really like to dive into this subject matter and get some legal expertise to be able to challenge it. But yeah, a right is a right that you actually have that you don't need to have consent for. So I think that their argument against child marriage is it's not very credible. And I think, we really need to look at it from that perspective and figure out, how can we really argue our points that, child marriage is a problem and it limits the rights of children once they're forced into a marriage. Once a child is forced into a marriage, they may not be able to leave until after the age of 18 because of all of the barriers that they will face, including not being able to hire a lawyer because you're not 18, so you can't enter into a contract. You can't enter into a lease, so you couldn't even get your own place if you needed to. You can't go into a shelter, as we saw with my research. So there's just so many barriers that we're putting in front of a minor to be able to leave a marriage that is potentially forced. So
We have a few more questions also. Has the ACLU prevented the passing of similar laws in other states or just in California?
They've definitely opposed similar legislation in other states. Let's see, I'm trying to think of a most recent one. I think it was Illinois. But yeah, the ACLU has opposed this legislation in other states, and they definitely have been a roadblock and a barrier. So I think it's really time to just call them out on the carpet and make them take a stance, either one way or another. Yeah, and the ACLU really changes depending where you are geographically. So that's the other challenge, is getting to know like who are the people that we need to be talking to here in California versus on the East Coast. So it really changes, the political dynamics really change state to state. And that's why this fight is really hard.
We have questions are pouring in, and it's fantastic. What happens in all the cases of recent immigrants that are coming to the US and have child brides?
Actually, that goes both ways. So you can actually import a child from another country to be your bride, or you can, as a minor here in the United States, you can actually sponsor an adult to come to the United States, even if you're a minor, and that's under federal law. And that's something that Unchained at Last, myself and the steering committee at the National Coalition to End Child Marriage are working diligently against. There's numerous federal loopholes right now. There's a federal loophole for statutory rape that allows child marriage victims to circumvent, statutory rape laws. Basically, their abusers are able to circumvent those laws at a federal level, which is the case here in California as well. So my abuser could have been charged with statutory rape when I was 15 years old, but by marrying me, he was able to legally get away with it. Yeah.
We have a few more questions. Do you think we would have more success tying child marriage laws with human trafficking laws?
So they are very closely related. Human trafficking and child marriage are very closely related and often overlap. The only issue that I can kind of see with that is that child marriage is a different form of child trafficking, in that victims are married to their abusers. So it creates a higher bar for them to be able to get out of those relationships. And so it's actually, it's related. It's definitely interrelated, but it's even a higher form of abuse, if that makes sense, because in order to leave that relationship, the victim actually has to divorce. And so that creates a significant legal barrier for them to be able to leave. And so, yes, there's a lot of overlap, and, potentially lumping them together, I could see some problems there, just because we're lumping two types of abuses together. And oftentimes child marriage victims need different services than maybe a human trafficking survivor needs, or maybe they need similar services, but I think there's just a little bit of a higher bar there.
Tanya also mentioned that this Thursday they have a hearing in Hawaii regarding a current bill, and already people are wanting to add amendments to water it down.
Yeah, Tanya, are you able to share? Are you here?
Hey, sorry I'm late. I apologize.
Oh, no problem. I was hoping that you could give us some updates about the child marriage bill that is currently pending in Hawaii, and how folks can can help.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's great. So we do have a bill. There's a couple of folks who've had a couple different approaches to it, but currently it'll go to a hearing this Thursday. So of course, testimony is helpful, and I'll figure out if they're going to accept live testimony. I know written's happening, but I think even live might be happening. And one of the pieces that's been added is a way for a emancipation to happen. So that's one of the concerns raised here by one of our senators was you should just be able to be emancipated. And so I don't disagree with that. If you're in a domestic violence situation, to have emancipation perhaps as an option, although I think it's fraught with issues as well. And so I'm interested what you've seen with that. And I know in other states that they've just outright banned it. It seems that they do have emancipation laws as well. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, so Tanya, I wanted to kind of dive into this issue because it's one that comes up a lot with legislation around child marriage, and that so in California, for example, the way emancipation plays out is if you're in a child marriage, you are legally emancipated after that marriage. And when people think about legal emancipation, you may think that you share all the same rights as an adult. That's actually not true. You still don't share all the same rights as an adult, and you're still under the age of 18. So even if you are emancipated under the law, most shelters still won't take you in. And it takes like long hours of conversations with some of these shelters to help them understand those laws. But generally speaking, most shelters don't want to take on the liability of having a child victim in their, under their shelter, basically. So it creates issues there. And even as an emancipated adult, there are many, places out there that they won't let you rent, even if you are emancipated, even if you explain to them that you're an adult. We're talking about children trying to navigate in an adult world. So there are a lot of problems around emancipation. And I think it creates this false sense of, oh, well, we're just kind of protecting this small group of minors who may be emancipated and then are able to marry, instead of setting the bar to 18, where over the age of 18, you can get married. If your relationship is really, that solid and important, you can wait a couple of years and get married then. You can wait 17 months or however long it is, and you can get married then, just like we tell children that they can't drink and they can't smoke cigarettes and all those other things that they're not allowed to do.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's interesting. And the other piece that seems to come up a lot around this, particularly here in Hawaii, and I would imagine elsewhere, if you look at the numbers, I think Unchained's done a great job. They have that interactive map where you can hover over your state and it'll show you what's happening, if you have a bill or not, if it's a week and all of that. And it'll give you the numbers that they've collected over the last decade or so, maybe a little longer. And so one of the that we were talking to, he was like, but it's such a small number. And Hawaii, I think, has 800 cases since 2000, 2001, something like that. And my question back to him was, so let me understand what number you would need to see. So if a child is coerced into marriage, and under the marriage, they're forced to have intercourse, it's still rape. And so how many of those do you need to see before it's a big enough number? And that totally changed the way he was viewing this. So I'm trying to figure out a better way to say that in testimony, but I think that really is a key piece that people have to understand. Is one too many? I think it is. As Ledge, I think you would as well. And then the other thing we've been trying to emphasize with them is this doesn't cost you anything to pass this law.
Exactly. It doesn't cost anything. It doesn't hurt anybody. We're just asking children not to get married. And I think it's pretty clear why we're asking children not to get married, because it's so easy to force and coerce and abuse a child into a marriage. And so similar with our statutory rape laws, those those laws are protectionism in nature, and they're trying to prevent children from, being forced into sex. Well, when you talk about marriage, you're talking about continuous sex over a very long period of time that you're expected to perform, as a wife. So I think that's definitely a really good argument, Tanya, and one that you shouldn't change at all. I think it's a great argument.
We'll see how it goes on Thursday.
Yeah, and I definitely plan to be there.
Excellent. Excellent.
Although they did not like the fact that child marriage survivors were not from Hawaii on our last legislative effort, I think.
Right.
So if you do have any folks that you can get from Hawaii to be on that call, I think that would probably be the best.
We've spoken to two, and I'm not sure how comfortable they are yet. So I have a call Tuesday with one of the gals to try to
Okay.
get a little info if can. So yeah.
If you need somebody as a support, because it's extremely hard to share your story publicly, and if you need some survivor support, I'm happy to offer that.
Okay. Well, we'll reach out.
So,
and let you
yeah, you're welcome to give them my number, and I'm happy to talk them through the process, because I think one of the things that's really hard during this process, during legislative process, is that there are often survivors on the line that want to share, that are able to share their stories, which, help shed light on the issue. However, from a survivor's perspective, it's extremely difficult, because you're talking about a subject that brings up a lot of, it brings you right back to the abuse. And so that can be a really, really hard issue for folks to talk about, and they need support. And so that's something that we're also, we're in dire need of emotional support and mental health support. So if you folks know of anybody, please let me know.
We do have a question. If anyone else can join that call and support the call on Thursday.
So it's it's open. The hearing is open for testimony. I imagine anyone can join that. Of course, it's going to be, it's a Hawaii bill, so I'm not sure how much outside testimony helps, but I can't imagine that would hurt.
Yeah, so I think often for providing testimony, there is a process for doing that. So you would need to, look up the bill and find out how you can submit your testimony, if you can submit a written testimony, or if you wanted to provide live testimony. I think there's probably a process for doing that. And each legislative body has their own process for that. But generally speaking, since the pandemic has started, a lot of it has shifted to online, which is great. So a lot more people can participate. And I see a hand up. Darlene?
Yes. Hi, Sarah. Thank you for this time. Darlene Sapp, and I work with Single Mothers Outreach. My question was, during this, within this fight and legal struggle, which I really, really, really appreciate. I also have a legal background. I used to practice family law back in Costa Rica, and I am totally an advocate of all of this. But within all of this, what is the mental health component? I really wanted to ask about that, because as we could see, there is a lot of contradiction legally. The kids are legally, they seem adults in terms of getting married, but they're kids in terms of signing a contract with an agreement with an apartment and things like that. The contradictions are pretty obvious. But also, when you were talking about getting kids forced into marriage, what is that extent of the word force? A lot of, I know cases of girls that just go out and live with somebody that is older just because of the abuse in the family household, and just because of, so that's some way a form of forcing kids out and throwing them in the arms of other people and getting into worse abuse. So where is all the fight in the mental health component with we could have, especially these girls, strong emotionally and mentally, and make the families understand that they're forcing kids and throwing kids into those things?
Yes, thank you so much for talking and for bringing to light some of those questions. There's a huge mental health component, obviously, to forcing somebody into a child marriage. Again, we're talking about children who are generally victims to ongoing abuse, whether that's physical, mental, or otherwise. They usually have less of a say in what their futures are. And so how do you help a victim who may not even know what's happening to them is abuse? That's kind of where you're starting. And so the impact of forced child marriage is often lifelong and it's intergenerational. So many forced child marriage survivors have actually been exposed to it even before birth, when their parents may have been forced into a marriage. In my case, my mother was forced into a marriage when she was 19 to my father. And so it's often intergenerational, and the impact, again, it's lifelong. It can have an impact that goes to your children. If you don't start dealing with those issues, unfortunately, that abuse can continue on. And it can be a vicious cycle. As many children who grow up with abuse, it becomes normalized. And if you don't recognize that behavior later on in adulthood, you can also become an abuser as well. So it's super important that children who are abused get that mental health treatment. And part of the way that they can access this type of treatment is by not just by leaving the marriage, but also by getting support from their community, whether that's a shelter, whether it's a mental health provider, but they definitely need that support. And I think that's one of the biggest obstacles to leaving a forced child marriage, is actually realizing that you're experiencing abuse. Actually, I wanted to just add one thing on that, because I think you brought up a really good point of what happens to a child before they're forced into a marriage. And that can often be part of the abuse. So it could be threats of violence. It can be isolation tactics. So isolation tactics are used in many cases. It can be, actual violence. There's such a thing called honor violence, which happens here in the United States and worldwide, where if a girl it says no to a marriage, then their male relatives may even attempt to kill that person in the name of honor. And so, yeah, I mean, in the most extreme cases, death becomes the ultimate abuse. And when we talk about child marriage, that can be one of the consequences. And sadly, there was actually a recent victim who committed suicide. Sometimes that's the only way out for a child to get out of these relationships. Mm-hmm. It's sad but true.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really an advocate for changing cycles.
Thank you. And also, I just wanted to show you guys, if you want to stay in touch, which I hope you do, you can sign up here. I have a blog here. You can sign up to follow it, and then I'll have your email address, or you can paste your email address into the chat, and I can do a follow-up email and share some of these materials. If you want to get involved, then you'll have my email as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. This was truly an amazing presentation. It was very educational. I enjoyed it immensely, and I'm sure everybody else did as much as I did. And we are looking forward to hearing more. And as a follow-up, I will send everybody the information that Sara will send me so that I can share all this amazing information with you guys. And remember, subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want to see any of our past videos, to please go to our website at scvzonta.org. Thank you guys for attending.
Thank you.